Alright, welcome back. So the next video we're going to be looking at getting rid of all this and just getting started with what we need. So we're going to start off with a very quick challenge in this video, and that is going to be for us to design our basic data type, our basic data. So whether or not you skipped ahead from the last video or you just or you went through the last video, either way, hopefully you already know the different data types, the basic ones in JavaScript. So the question is, what data type would be the best for organizing our posts? I gave you a couple hints in the last video, so hopefully you can figure it out. But what would be the best? We don't know how many. We can give you some facts about our posts. We don't know how many posts we're going to have. We might have post 2, post 3, all the way up to post 100. We could have 150. So just doing, for example, var post and then equaling something wouldn't really work. So what type of, well, declaration, what type of variable are we going to want? So go ahead and pause the video right now and just think about it. Think about what we want. We want something that is more dynamic. So pause the video right now and think about it. All right, and welcome back. So hopefully you paused and thought about it. And if you didn't need to pause, congratulations. This is a pretty simple question. One of the first challenges you're going to encounter in this course. I'm going to try and enter a good amount of challenges so that way we can test your knowledge and keep you going, so that way you do feel like you're actually making progress and you know what you need to work better on and what not to. So for storing a bunch of posts, since there's so much data, the very basis of, we're going to have a ton of things here. We're going to have what I would consider an array, a unlimited list of posts. So we're going to go ahead and define array. So we're going to say var, and we're going to call it, well, it's my post, so I'm just going to call it posts. Generally, when you're making an array, because it's going to store more than one data type or more than one data value, you're going to call it posts. So you don't want to call your array post, because that's making people assume that it's immediately just one thing. It could be one string, it could be an object. But if you want posts, that could be an array of strings, multiple pieces of data. So you want to always name arrays posts, which is something like that's plural. And we're going to set that equal to what? Remember from the last video, we're going to want to do brackets and press enter to close it up. And then it's best, you don't have to, but it's good coding practice to put in a semicolon at the end. You don't have to, because the JavaScript will just immediately assume that that's the end of an array, so it doesn't really matter. But you should always have a semicolon at the end of your statement specifically. That's why I said not at the end of the line, because you might wonder, why is there not one up here? Well, it's because it doesn't make sense, because it's at the end of a statement. Because technically, it could still be up here like this, but it's down here just so it looks more organized. All right, and that's it. Actually, we don't even need to open this up because we have no post data at the front. This is a test post that we're gonna keep here for a little bit until we can get used to adding posts. So that's the basics of that. Now we have our posts array. It's empty though, because we don't have any posts. We could actually put this one post in there. We could do that. So let's do that actually. So we're gonna go ahead and define that. Now we can't just do, for example, we can't just do my posts and then, or my, like, for example, we can't just do post number 1 and then also do test post, because how are we gonna, I don't know why it keeps double spacing for me. Every time I click space, it does a double space. What is that? Test post. And then put in the date. We can't do that because how are we going to access? How are we going to know what to access? It's going to be very confusing. So the best thing to do is to create an object inside of an array. This is going to be an array of objects, because when you want to have a ton of data associated to one thing, so for example, one post is going to have a title, a body, a date, and just pretty much that, and also an ID. We're going to get into that, an ID. When you're dealing with lots of data, this isn't a huge app, but it's still nice to have IDs just because of a few things we're going to have to deal with. For example, people being able to delete a post in any order is going to get confusing unless we have an ID that's consistent. So we're going to need to have an ID. So let's go over that. So this is basically like we're creating a post object inside here. It's not going to be called post because you don't need to name anything in an array. So we're going to have a few properties here. So first of all, we're going to have the title. Actually, we should probably start out with the ID. So ID and then semicolon, or just regular colon, excuse me. And we're going to have that associated to a number. So the first ID should probably just be 1. Start at 1. And when you're dealing with multiple things in an array or an object, instead of doing a semicolon, you want to just do a comma and then move on to the next one. So title will be a string because it's text, and it's just going to be post number 1. And then down here, we're going to do body, and we're going to do another string, and it's going to be test post. And then the date. So we're going to do created at is the consistent name that I and a lot of programmers also like to use when you have a date. So you're going to have a date that's when this was created. So let's see. Now, because this data isn't persistent, if I type something like new date, which is what you're supposed to do when you create a new post. If you ever create a new post, you should always do new date. It's going to create a new date right when that post was added. And then you want to save that date somewhere in storage, where you're going to save all this in storage, but you want to save that in storage so that way the date's always consistent and not resetting every time you reset it, every time you like relaunch the application. Because every time that I save this and it refreshes and I do, let's say, posts dot created at, well, currently it's undefined, I guess. Why is that undefined? Oh, we gotta go to the first. Whoops, excuse me. I gotta ignore what I'm doing right here. You don't need to worry about this. So we have the current date that was created when this first launched. Now, if we go ahead and think about that, so it's 8/31/22. We'll just look at that, 31/22. Now, if we refresh and we do the same thing, it's 31/59 now. And then we refresh, now it's going to be 32 something, 32/04. So you see it's changing. And that's because every time it's running right when this, there's a new date being created, because this isn't being persistent, of course. We have to force it to be persistent, which we're going to use local storage later. Well, that's the data that we need. Now, we can keep it for right now. It's fine. We don't need to worry about it, because later we're not even going to have a test post. This is just for testing purposes. But that's basically that. We have the data that we need. I don't know why my spacebar keeps double spacing. Very weird. That's the basis of the data that we needed. And yeah, so let's go ahead and move into the next section. Now, that's really all we need for posts. We now have our schema, basically, our model of how we want to model our posts. What do we want to do next? Next, we're going to want to grab all of the UI elements. We need to grab this, and then the posts array. So how do we do that? We need to grab 3 things. How do you grab things from the web page? Now, you could go ahead, and this is where you're going to take some time to either make a choice. So you can follow through with the rest of this video and follow on my lead and try to see and just kind of like get a feel for it if you want, or you can take another path and you can just Google. You can Google something like, let me show you an example just to get you off your feet, because here's the thing: when you're programming, the skill of Googling is something that people often underestimate when they're getting started. Being able to search things and develop a search query that really can get your question and what you're trying to find quickly is a difficult skill that you're going to have to develop as a programmer, and it's just a great skill in life. But specifically as a programmer, it's very useful, because you're not going to be able to, as you move up in programming languages and you learn JavaScript, then maybe you learn Java, then you learn PHP, then you learn Ruby, whatever. As you learn more things, it's going to be increasingly hard to remember every single thing about JavaScript when you're focusing on Ruby mainly, and maybe you're doing part-time JavaScript. So you need to always be able to look up things, because there's not always going to be a video course that you're following. This is a very introduction course, but I want to also get your feet wet, and I don't want to sit here and baby you. So you can take this, you can continue with this video, or you can go ahead and say, let's say we wanted to get access to objects in the UI. So let's say JavaScript, I always preface it with what I'm trying, like what language I'm trying to use, because otherwise it might interpret maybe I'm trying to do Node or I'm trying to do CSS or something else. So JavaScript, get, well, this is great. So JavaScript get, so we can get element by class, and we don't really want that because that's accessing my class, but we want to just say get element by ID actually. So let me understand that. Now first I was going to say get element, but let's go ahead and let's actually make a better query that's more vague. I'm not going to look at these search terms. I'm just going to say let's get an element. So we're going to get HTML, and there you go. Now it's starting to pop up. It's just like, this one's so easy that it's like, okay, we want to get HTML from Webpage. That's such a weird query. So can JavaScript read? So this one's not that great. This one's not that great. Getting HTML asynchronously from a JavaScript page. And you're gonna go through some of these, you're gonna be confused. Now what's gonna happen is I skipped over all those search terms that were like recommended because I wanted to really help show you what I would do if I was developing a query around something harder. But I mean, this is so easy. I mean, JavaScript get is gonna immediately give you what you want. But you're gonna find something like JavaScript DOM document. And then down here, it's gonna start giving you the different ways you can get things. So document is another object. Document is the entire document of HTML and all the functions and properties associated to it. So another function of document is get element by ID. That is basically getting an element by the ID that we have here. Remember how IDs are unique? Well, now we can get the post-add button by doing the ID of post-add. So let's go ahead and use that property that function right there. So let's go ahead and collapse that. So first we're going to say var, and we're going to declare, well, actually, let's go ahead and do something a little bit, well, actually, let's just go with var for now. So we're going to name this. We're going to say post add button. Very simple. You want to have your variables be self-explanatory. You don't want num and string like I had earlier. That was just a showcase for you guys. And we're going to set that equal to document dot get element by ID. And then that's a function, so we got to give it parameters. So what do we need to give it? Well, it's saying here we need to give it a string. So what that string is going to be is, well, get element by ID. We need to give it an ID. It has no idea what we're looking for. So string, and then it has to be post-add, because that's the post-add. So now we have, once this runs, we're going to have the add post button and all the properties and functions associated to that in post-add button. So now we actually have access to this. Perfect. All right, now let's move on to the next one. So are there any other methods that we could actually use? Because you might not go with that one first. Is get elements by tag name. That is basically finding elements based on like body and div. We don't want to use that because that's super vague. Then there's some methods down here. So you can do the element. So we could do something like, instead of just element here, this is italicized because it means that you're not going to actually, it's not actually literally element. It's just like, you know, our button.style.property. This is how we added CSS. Our property.setAttribute, attribute value. So we could try something really quick actually. Let's do the set attribute actually. So let's come down here to var post add button. We'll say post add button dot set attribute. Now it's going to take in two strings. So it's going to take in the attributes, comma, the property. So attributes are things like, for example, technically of this button, there's a class and there's an ID. Those are attributes, but we don't want that. We want something like disabled is an attribute. So whether or not the button is disabled. So if we set it to true, now it's disabled. And if we set it to false, disabled false. We set it to empty? Oh, maybe it's just disabled. Okay. All right. I don't really know why that worked. Okay. This happens sometimes when you don't really know why something works. I guess that I don't know why it doesn't work when it's false. Okay, that's besides the point. I've never used that, but now you can see, like, in code, like, you could now use code to dynamically determine, like, let's say that if the post text is empty, you don't want to be able to add a post if this text box is empty. You don't want to be able to do that, so make it blurred out. So that's that one. We're gonna go ahead and get rid of that because we don't actually need that. The next one is we want to get the text box. So post text box. And we're gonna say document dot get element by ID, and we gotta get the ID. So post text box should be above the add button, and there it is. So post dash text. All right, there's that. And then the last one is the post. So we want to say posts. Now we can't call it posts because we're going to have a naming issue here because they're the same name and you don't want variables with the same name. So variables are a lot like IDs in that sense. So how are we going to call, what are we going to call this? So var posts, we might just call it posts UI list. We'll just call it post list, actually. Post list. Well, no, we'll just call it post UI list. Just so we're being very clear with what this is. It's a list, because if we just did post list, it still could be confused with this when you're reading the code. But post UI list, user interface. This means that it's something like this. So immediately when you read this post UI list, people are going to immediately think that this is a reference to the post area, in this case the unordered list, the post unordered list group with the ID of posts. They're going to immediately assume it's that, and then we just got to do document. Now something else I'm going to show you really quick is, that doesn't look like it's spelled right, and it's not, is instead of get element by ID, let's try something else. Let's try something a little more vague, because let's say we wanted to get something by the class it had. So for example, it also has a class of list group. That's a unique class. We could do something like either get element by class name and then put in the class name of list dash group, and that would work. That would work fine. Or we could do something like query selector. Query selector. Now query selector is interesting because now instead of doing just list group, that won't work. We're not getting an error, but that won't work. Now what we need to do is use a little bit of CSS, kind of. So CSS, the way that you access like a class is you do, because this is a class, the way that you access it is you do dot. And when you're doing query selector, it has no idea if you're putting in, let's say a tag, an element name, or if you're putting in a class or you're putting in an ID. So this technically it's going to assume is a class, not a class, not an ID. It's going to automatically assume that it's going to take it literal. It's a class. It might assume that's like a div. So if you had something like, you know, list dash group, if you had that, well, it's not going to let me do it, I guess. If you had this, it's going to look for something like that. We don't have that there, so we got to add a dot. Now, if you wanted to do an ID, which we do actually want to do an ID, because list dash group, what if we accidentally had more than one list dash group? That would be very bad. We want to do hash. Hash is for an ID. So query selector, we're looking for an ID now, and then put the name, so posts, hash posts. It's basically the same thing as all these other ones. You're going to get the same outcome if we just did query select, or if we just did get element by ID and then posts, but this hash wasn't there. It would still be the same thing. We're just doing it differently to show you different ways that you can do it. So that's the basis of that. And I think that's it for this video. These videos are getting pretty long. We're getting up to 20 minutes. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. And I will see you in the next video where we're going to look at adding in posts based on text input. So we're getting pretty quickly into that nitty-gritty of JavaScript. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.